And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Black and Blue Pod. I'm your host, Matt McLaughlin, joined alongside a very prestigious writer. This man wrote a book that is on my Mount Rushmore of books. Mount Rushmore season is upon us. This is on my Mount Rushmore of sports books that turned me into a sports enthusiast, I guess. Writer of the Victory season. He's got multiple books out as well, which we'll get into. It's the one, the only Rob Weintraub. Rob, thank you for coming on the show.
Yes, the standing ovation. I can hear it in the background. Thank you so
Right?
much.
Our whole studio, our studio audience is going ballistic. You just can't see it.
Right. Yes,
So let's start at the beginning. What was your childhood like growing up, and how did you first get into sports? I know we're going in the big questions, but how'd you first get into sports as a kid?
Mainly by watching him on TV, playing him in the schoolyard, and going to games. I grew up in suburban New York City, a place called Rye, New York, which is familiar to people in that area for the amusement park that's in the town, Rye Playland, as seen in the movie Big. Perhaps you might know it, but also close by to both Yankee Stadium and New York City, Yankee Stadium being most important there. So I grew up a big Yankees fan. We played baseball all the time, in the schoolyard along with the other sports. And I just really got into it. My dad was a sports fan, but he didn't really sort of pass it down in the classic fashion, I wouldn't say. He was working a lot, and then he was ill, and then wound up. My parents wound up getting divorced, so I really kind of brought it on myself. I've always just, I don't know. I thought the dramatic portions of sports were much more real than any other thing that you watch on TV, so-called "quote unquote" dramas that were being pushed at us on television. Held nothing to even your average football or baseball game, much less a playoff game or something of true intensity like that. And it just really captivated me from a young age. Both, playing. Obviously, I was the classic topped out in high school and realized I wasn't going to be a professional athlete. So better stay in business and stay involved in sports in a different capacity. And that's how I wound up, kind of setting a career path to be involved in sports, whether it was writing or in television, and staying just a fan, which is really the most important part of it all. Because if you're not still juiced by the action on the field, then it's hard to really make it a profession that you care about off the field.
So I see a Bengals helmet behind you. Are you a Bengals fan from New York? How did this happen?
Yes, that's a great question that I've been asked a multitude of times over the years. And there is no easy answer. Had there been, I would have saved myself plenty of psychic pain over the years and become a Giants fan like everybody else where I grew up. Unfortunately, I guess when I was 7, 6, really impressionable age, I happened to flip on the TV and the Bengals were playing. I guess they must have been playing the Jets. And the Bengals, I don't know if they even won or lost, but I was quite taken with the uniforms probably. And through whatever alchemy goes on in a little kid's mind, I just sort of said, okay, that's my team. And it's manifested itself in hardcore fandom since then. Obviously, this past season was much better than most of what I've experienced my adult life, but it's been a wild ride, mostly a painful one. But yes, I am one of the few, the proud, the Cincinnati fan. So I'm a New York fan in all the other sports, but the Bengals take precedence in professional football, for better and largely for worse.
As an Eagles fan, I sympathize with that. Up until the past few years, I've been riding a pretty high wave, and now I understand why my older relatives are all bitter and old and just don't buy into hope. But what do you think of the Bengals white helmets that they just unveiled for this upcoming season?
Yeah, they're sweet. They're a alternative, quote unquote, helmet. So it's not like they're switching to it as a full-time thing, which would be maybe a bridge too far. But for a couple of games, I think they're pretty slick looking. The white tiger, Joe Burrow pretty much can pull off any outfit, uniform, whatever he's wearing. So I don't have any doubt that'll be the rage, not only in Cincinnati but hopefully around the nation when Joe rocks that white white helmet and the uniforms that match, and puts up 450 yards on whoever they're playing that week and a couple of touchdowns. That will be nice. And yeah, I think they're good. They're certainly unique, and Bengal helmets tend to be that way, which is probably why I became a fan in the first place.
No, there have been some great uniforms that I personally love. Obviously, the Kelly Green jerseys have a special place in my heart. The Houston Oilers throwbacks. Yeah, I hope the Titans bring those back at some point. But as a kid, that's better than like getting to like 18, 19 years old and you're like, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to switch to Bengals because why not? And it's like hopping on a bandwagon. I have friends that are just hopping on like the Warriors bandwagon. And I'm like, that's just not allowed. That shouldn't be allowed. You should be excommunicated.
Yeah, that's harsh, but yes, I agree that once you pick your team or the team picks you, which is generally how it works, that's your team for life. I could be persuaded in the case of a team that perhaps leaves town, and then you're left without one.
Fair.
And you get to pick and choose a new one, I suppose. But generally, yeah, to wax and wane with the team's fortunes, or to follow a team because they have a particular star player like Steph Curry and then forget all about them once he retires. A little shallow, not a mark of a true sportsman, no question.
You need to go through pain. Pain is being part of a sports fan because then it makes the highs so much greater.
Absolutely correct. Yes. If I had a podcast, and perhaps I'll do one, the entire theme of it would be the most painful loss in your team's particular history, and let's wallow in that for some time before we move on to the good days, which are few and far between.
Exactly, but the good days are going on right now. But let's get back to you. How did you start off I know no writers don't like to talk about themselves, but how did you start off as a writer, and what were some of the the trials and tribulations of starting a career and trying to not get people, but I guess spread the word of whatever you may be working on?
Okay. Well, first of all, let me correct you on one point. Writers do like to talk about themselves. It's funny. We're all human. And as long as it's in a case like this where we can, concentrate on the good parts and the rise to qualified success, at least, then sure, we're happy to talk about it. Not necessarily the process or what you're working on at the moment, but generally speaking, writers will be more than happy in some cases, to talk about themselves. So don't worry about that. Well, let's see. I went to Syracuse University, which is a well-known communications school. I knew from an relatively early age, that I wanted to do that. As I said, I wanted to be involved in sports and communications. Mass communications was the way to go. Marv Albert and Bob Costas and the rest of the litany of Syracuse alums definitely had their sway on me, and I went there, and it was a very good education for that particular field. And I actually was a television producer at first, and for the first sort of section of my professional career, I worked at ESPN, and I worked overseas, and I worked in you name the event, I probably worked on it in some capacity. Olympics, World Cup, Super Bowl, etc. But I always wanted to write, and I always wanted to write a book. And from a very young age, I don't know, my mother always said that you have a book in you. I got to meet a great, well-known former New York Times sports writer named Robert Lipsyte when I was young, and he kind of has maintained. I managed to maintain a relationship over these years with him, where he was always very encouraging and said, if you really are pressed and moved to write, don't turn a blind eye to it, because few people are, and the people who are, a good percentage of those people don't follow through, and the world is deprived of what they have to say or what they might be able to pass along. So I kind of took that to heart, and I started writing really. I guess at the dawn of the internet age. I was living in Asia, of all things, working in television. And there was a sort of new magazine that came out called Slate, which you are probably familiar with. It's still around, mostly in the podcast space now, ironically enough. But they welcome submissions from just about anybody. And because I was living in Asia, I was like, well, at least I can do it over the internet. That's cool. And they accepted my first piece, and then a second, and I was writing about sports for them for some time. And that gave me the confidence to sort of I guess you'd say, move into longer and more detailed writing, as well as the fact that in television, I had a family. Sports television in particular is often, obviously, nights, weekends, long, long hours, a lot of traveling. It was something I didn't necessarily want to keep on doing throughout my adult life. And the idea that writing could counterbalance that, at least in part, was certainly very appealing to me. So I kind of tipped the scales more and more as the years went along toward the writing. And then it was a winding path, but around 2009, basically I changed agents. I wound up with a literary agent who I had known at Syracuse. He's actually the cousin of my roommate and best friend at Syracuse, and we had known each other there, and then kind of gone our separate ways. And one day, my buddy calls me up and says, "Hey, remember my cousin Farley is his name?" He said he's an agent now, and he'd love to talk to you. And we hooked up, and that's from our conversations came my first book, which was The House That Ruth Built. Very natural way to go for me. Baseball, New York Yankees, winning World Series, Yankee Stadium. It was all right in my wheelhouse. And really the only question was not sort of, was I able to summon the ability to write it, but was I able to have the stamina and the sort of stick-to-itiveness to write it. And I guess when they gave me a contract to do it, that sort of put the burr up my fanny and said, okay, this is real, you got to do it. And the rest kind of flowed from there, really. That's the short sort of career path. I still work in television. I still counterbalance the two as best as I can. And, they both sort of wax and wane with the tides, as we say. But I do my best to keep my feet firmly planted in both areas as much as possible.
You lived in Asia? What was that like? I haven't been. The farthest I've been is Chicago. That's it.
Yeah, I threw that in there kind of out of nowhere, didn't I?
Humble
I
brag a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, I guess. I mean, this is, I lived in Hong Kong and in Sydney, Australia, and a little bit in Singapore too. Went there, and this is television work, all of it. I was working on NFL football shows that we produced out of Atlanta, where I still live now. I came back here, and the show had run for 3 years, and then it got canceled. And I was sort of, what do I do next? And through context of that show, which aired in Europe, somebody had passed along to me that a television company was looking in Asia, was looking for somebody to move there and work on weekly television shows that they produced there and get to travel around Asia and profile athletes and cover games and that kind of stuff. And I was young and fancy free, and I'd always wanted to discover, so to speak, China in particular, but Asia in general. Sounded like a great opportunity, and I didn't think about it very much. And I guess 3 weeks after the Super Bowl, I was stepping off a plane in Hong Kong, and a whole new life ensued. So yes, I lived there for the greater part of 4.5, 5 years almost, and went through a lot. And there was plenty of action happening there. Particularly germane to our particular podcast, however, was the fact that the internet was just dawning in its infancy. This is right around 2000, the millennium changing over, Y2K, as they say. And that was when, you could really, you didn't have to be in New York particularly, or even in the United States as it happens, or, you could be anywhere to not just write, but also have your work seen and communicate easily with editors and other gatekeepers. It really obviously transformed, as pretty much everything about not just society writ large, but in this case, writing. And so I was able to live in Asia and yet at the same time kind of write about American sports and occasionally Asian sports as well.
And that's interesting to me because you have, along with many other veteran writers, have seen kind of 3 different eras of the way sports are covered, whether it's television, the internet, and now technically like social media has completely changed how sports are covered, because now every one outlet throws up a start, bench, or cut graphic of like Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, and Justin Herbert. And like, that's considered sports coverage. And I get why they got to do those things, but it's different than the television or even the newspaper days before television. That being said, what is it like kind of seeing these three different almost revolutions in the way sports are covered and the way they're approached, and how different writers approach different, I guess, creators approach different topics?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I tend to look at it as a quasi historian, at least in sports, for sure. I tend to look at it in the broad sweep, and it's not really anything new. I mean, we had the dawn of the radio age, and we had the dawn of the mass-produced magazine age, which led to an entirely different way of coverage. And then, of course, the early days of television, which completely revolutionized everything. Along the way, every other form of media has had to adapt, and they've had to sort of make their peace with this new revolution, but at the same time find a way to survive. And I think we're still seeing that in a lot of its ways. We're still watching television. At least I am. It's different, and it's not the four channels maybe that some of us grew up upon back in the day. But it's still viable, and it's adapted, and it's also sort of subsumed the way these newer fangled media outlets like social media and the internet, it's brought it in and used it in sort of a companion to the way they cover sports. And I think you see that the same thing will happen with social media, to pick the newest form. In 10 or 15 years, there'll be another revolution. Who's to say what it will be? But I'm sure that social media doesn't necessarily go away in a stretch. It's here to stay. And the question will be, how does it adapt? How do we use it in a way that augments the other media instead of, sort of being forced to pick or choose one space? I mean, I think that's the worst thing anyone can do, as I've found. And, talking to you, somebody coming up, I know that you're interested in working in as many media and outlets as possible. I've tried to maintain, throughout my career, a foot, or at least a toe, as I said, in just about any outlet, as long as you're getting paid for it. It works, right? So, it's always, there's always a period of adjustment. It's always a little bit, oh, what am I going to do now? But usually, they all have one thing in common, and that's the storyline is king. If you have a good story, if there's something interesting to tell, if there's something worth relating to another person, anything interesting that somebody or many people are going to find that they need to slow down at least for a minute and take in, then it really doesn't matter what the media is. You're going to find a way to get it to them, and it's just a matter of the dressing it up in the latest form of whatever the media flavor of the month happens to be. But no matter what happens, we still see and write and read the printed word, which is supposed to have gone away, decades ago, and it's still with us. So, if I have to play advice giver, I would say, don't be afraid of new media. Don't worry about how this or that is going to change the way things are covered. Use it to augment and adapt, and get your stories out there one way or another, and people will find you.
Augment, word of the day. I haven't heard that since the SAT.
Oh man, I'm a writer. I gotta bring this stuff out. It's my big guns.
Exactly. But that is kind of interesting that I think people do tend to fall into that trap of following trends and trying to fit into a certain mold, no matter what the medium is specifically. But with you, was there a challenge in writing a book, but writing it the way you wanted to do it, but then a publisher wants something written differently? Were there ever any, not challenges, but I guess conflicts and trying to balance something like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's always a push-pull, no question. I wouldn't say that there was like a huge, argument about it. Like, it wasn't like I was approaching these things from way out in left field. To get a book even to that point, I'll give your audience sort of a inside peek at how this works. I mean, basically, there's an agent who is your middleman and your representative, and you work with your agent. As I said, his name is Farley. In my case, we work together to sort of shape what's called a proposal, which is basically the book in miniature. A sort of 20% meltdown of what you want to do. You don't have to hold to it, but that's basically what the publishing company then looks at and says, okay, this is something we can market. This is something we will fit our other titles. This is something we would fit in with our company, basically. And there's a little bit more to it, but that's basically the upshot of it. So it's not like it's not like the situation would ever develop where all of a sudden you turn in a book and they're like, wait a minute, what the hell is this? I mean, I guess that has happened. I shouldn't say that it's never it's an impossibility, but generally speaking, they know my approach. They know the way I use phrases. They know what I'm looking for and what I want to write about. I certainly wrote that first book, The House that Ruth Built, which is about 1923 and the building of Yankee Stadium and the first Yankees championship and this kind of crossroads season in not just Yankee history, but baseball history. But I wrote it from a modernist perspective. I wasn't, when I used contemporary, articles and references and things like that, but I did it in sort of a way that it was almost commenting upon them rather than just presenting them as fact. And then my publishing company was certainly behind that. And Victory Season, which you so kindly mentioned earlier as being one of your favorites, there was a similar approach there. It took a while for us to work out sort of the exact nature of how we were going to tell that story in terms of the book's about ostensibly 1946, the year after World War II, the year when everybody was back home from the war and what baseball was like and what the nation was like. But at the same time, you have to tell all those stories about World War II to make it, sort of give it a frame of reference. And the question became, how much we were going to devote to that and in what order and in, how much flashbacking we were going to do, that kind of thing. And, my editor and I went back and forth over various items, but I wouldn't say there was ever a real conflict. I mean, if the conflict stage really comes at the very beginning when you're trying to get them to publish and give you an advance contract essentially to write the book, that's where that's where the main conflict stage takes place. Now my most recent book, which is called The Divine Miss Marble, which was about a woman tennis player who was at the top of the sport before World War II broke out. Her name is Alice Marble. Then she ostensibly, according to her, became a spy during World War II. In the course of that research, I discovered that much of what she claimed was not true, or at least was different than the way she presented it. And there was a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that she either made up or kind of shaded various elements of her story. So in that case, that was one where conflict is too severe a word maybe, but there was definitely a case where the publishing company, my editor, and I had to sort of re-rack in midstream and find a way to make it work so that I wasn't, because I was pretty angry at this woman, I have to admit, when I found I'd been duped by her memoir and all her statements of her daring do in World War II Europe, some of which were true, but a lot of it wasn't. So we had not battles, but kind of back and forths about tone and about language and about how you're going to approach this and whether or not to put myself into the book, which ultimately I did as a sort of quasi detective and achieving a sympathetic eye toward the achievements she did have, rather than just being angry at the fact that she may have lied a little bit in her memoir, which is not unprecedented by any stretch. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying yes, there have been back and forths plenty of times, but for me anyway, it's never been a conflict between the publishing company and myself. But as I say, their idea of conflict is basically, we're not going to publish this, try something else. There's been plenty of times where I've come up with ideas that I thought were great, and either my agent or the editor or the publishing company basically said, try again. So
Yeah.
that's where the conflict really arises. And you don't really have much of a conflict, because when they say no, you don't have much opportunity to convince them otherwise. Seldom happens. So anyway, that's a peek inside the publishing window for anybody who's interested out there. Hopefully you enjoyed it.
And for a book like Victory Season, when you're trying to condense an entire season of baseball, but also roughly 5 to 6 years of American history, maybe more than, into 400, 500 pages ish, give or take, like, what is that process like of just getting the idea out and then getting to the end result of this 500 piece that goes through this whole timeline. What is that process like for you?
Yeah, well, it can be difficult. It's weird. The irony is, the more of a, in this case, baseball fan you are, the more you want to write about the individual games and the players, and you want to get into the nitty gritty. And yet, that's sort of not what you want to do from a mass market, or as much of a mass market as you can have perspective. Because, if you start writing about every single uh, Brooklyn Dodger game from 1946, and this happened in the seventh inning, and this happened in the ninth, it's pretty tedious, and pretty soon most of your audience is going to throw the book into the corner and pick up something else. So it's really a way of balancing that, getting the important bits, the most important parts, and figuring out what that is, who are the most important personalities, and what's the most interesting aspects of their lives, and presenting that. And then within that particular framework, you take a player, just Stan Musial, okay, all-time great player from the Cardinals who played in 1946, and you think, all right, well, am I going to talk about what he really did in that season on a game-by-game basis, or just sort of use and tell and paint a character sketch of him, and then within that kind of dot in little bits about what he did during that season and how that was sort of emblematic of his entirety of his career, and the person himself. So it's really, again, it all goes back to story. Think to yourself, what's when you're watching baseball highlights, you want to have a sort of a dramatic context to a particular play. It's like you can admire a home run, but if a home run in an 8-2 game is different than a home run in the bottom of the ninth of a tie game, right? You're sort of doing the same thing in writing books about this. You're picking out the best part, the most dramatic part, the stuff that'll advance your story the best. And there's a lot of editing and self-editing involved in that. And that's where the passion for your project and the love of writing and the love of history really shines through. Because if it can get a little bit, maybe not tedious is not the right word, but you can get lost in the weeds pretty easily. And if you don't, really enjoy what you're doing and have your eye on the big picture the whole time, you can wind up getting lost. So that's really where that comes from. And by the victory season, I'd already done it once for the book about the Yankees, and that really helped me guide along, because I had done it already. I knew, and I had a shorthand by that point. I could really, at a glance, see what I could use and what I didn't need, and it made it much easier to go through and write. And every book gets easier in that sense. The more you do anything, obviously, the more practice, the more reps you get in practice, the better you're going to play. So it's the same with writing. Just, I tell people all the time, how do I become a writer? How do I, get involved? How do I do a book? And I say, there's no substitute, obviously, for just doing it. You read a lot and you write a lot, and you'll find your voice, and it'll come relatively naturally. You won't even notice that you're becoming a writer, quote unquote. It'll just happen.
Yeah. And I think people kind of underestimate the exhausting part of writing a book. And when you're, I'm sure when you probably experience this, I would imagine, I've never written a book, obviously, but I'm sure when you're going through draft after draft, making revision after revision, after like 2 times I revise a 2-page essay, I want to submit it. I'm done with it. But I can't even imagine for a 400-page, 500-page book and doing all types of edits and stuff like that. Have you ever experienced that type of, I guess, burnout? That's kind of a buzzword now, but that type of burnout, and really like question, I guess, a project that you were working on and saying, oh, do I really want to keep doing this and just keep pushing through?
Of course, every writer deals with that. I mean, that's an automatic. Um, there's different levels of it, and there's a certain amount of, you get so sick of your own work and so sick of your own sort of the words that you put on the page. As you say, you just want to chuck it and do anything else.
Yeah, you're saying to
Part of,
yourself, oh, who's this dude? Shut up. I'm tired
yeah,
of hearing this guy.
very much so. Yeah, that happens. And yet at the same time, you're always chiseling away, and you're never really fully satisfied, and you want to have it, and you want to keep doing it before it, kind of goes out into the world. As I always say, you don't really finish a book; they just take it away from you and publish it, whether you're ready or not. And that winds up being the case. Sometimes I pull the books down off the shelf, years later, and my God, why the hell did I write that sentence? That was horrible. Or why did I go off on this tangent? Ridiculous. But at a certain point, you can just get up your own navel so far that it's self-defeating. So it's good that you have a deadline, and you have an editor for all these things, and he not only works on your narrative, on what you give him, but he works on your psyche and your work progress if he's a good editor as well, and he'll help you. I've had an editor who's talked me off the ledge at various occasions, no question about it. And again, the passion for what you're doing usually wins through. It's sort of, that's the acid test. It's every writer comes to it. This is crap. Why am I doing this? Let me move on. And I'm never going to get 500 pages. I'm only on page 42. I
Yeah.
think it helps in that when you do nonfiction, as I've done, a real help in a granular sense is that there's, direct passages, quotes, people say things, and you can just directly cut and paste that into your narrative. And if you come across a passage that somebody wrote from a newspaper from 1946, you can just take that entirety of that passage and put it into your narrative. And it's work, and you're advancing your story, but you're not actually coming up with anything. You're not typing. You're just putting in what other people have said and wrote, and it's going in. And it helps you along just sort of from a mental standpoint. You're not constantly, oh my God, I have to come up with something that's witty here, or I have to, get a good sentence here that's going to tie these two passages together. It's kind of like the building of a building. And there's sometimes you're really measuring and being precise, and other times you're just hammering, and it's kind of mindless work. And that helps you build the edifice along the way. Having a little bit of mindless work is always good, as we know. And little by little and day by day, if you don't look at it as a 500-page project, you look at it as, I'm going to write, a decent amount, even if that's two good paragraphs. I'm going to get that done today. Just keep at it every day, as much as you possibly can, even if it's for an hour. And the building grows, and one day you'll have a skyscraper without even really realizing that you've been working on it all that time.
Exactly. And what's cool about victory season to me is it kind of brings me back to a time when baseball players weren't viewed as like, how do I say this? And they weren't the coolest. Like there was a time there where baseball athletes were not the coolest athletes. Everyone wanted to be like a wide receiver or a hockey player. But back in the 40s, Joe DiMaggio was an American icon. Like that's crazy. Now, what are your thoughts on some of the more flashy baseball players like Fernando Tatis Jr., Juan Soto? And is it kind of, for me, at least my generation, it's kind of bringing back that love of like a specific player? I mean, what are your thoughts now as a guy who's seen plenty of baseball games in his day? What are your thoughts on that as baseball tries to evolve and get more mainstream?
Yeah, maybe I'm out of step with my quote unquote older generation. I have always been a guy who wants some flair, make it interesting. I mean, baseball's unwritten rules, and you gotta grimace all the time and be like Joe DiMaggio, who never cracked a smile anywhere near the ballpark, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's obviously it's a different time, because when Joe DiMaggio played, baseball was the number one sport. It was not contested in any real way by anything else except maybe boxing. It was what everybody cared about and devoured religiously. And you could already make the argument that if he had really let a lot of his personality come out, he would have been devoured by the baseball hungry masses. Obviously, it's a much different environment now. Baseball is a distant third, probably behind football and basketball. And the more it can just be a marketable entity, and whether that means bat flips and guys like Tatis who are allowed to bring their personality right out into the field, and miking up guys during games, which is awesome. The more of that, the better. Obviously, just from a person who loves the sport and wants baseball to do as well as it can, there's everything of that is good. You always want to see that. And when people are, grumble bunnies who are like, oh, you shouldn't have, stared at his home run, we're going to hit him next time up. I mean, come on, what are you doing here? I know you think you're the keeper of some unwritten code flame or whatever that's been burning for 150 years, but you're not. It's like we were talking about media, sports too. They got to evolve and keep up with with the way the world turns. And I think baseball, for the most part, realizes that. And I think, your generation, so to speak, is more in tune, and they've heard you in the hallowed halls of Major League Baseball headquarters, and they're trying their best. There's only a certain amount of things you can do with the sport in general. I mean, there's sort of two arguments. Like we were talking about, bat flipping and things like that are all great. Now, what about when it comes to altering the very nature of the game, putting a player at second base when the 10th inning starts, or various other things they tried to do. Some of it was pandemic related, obviously, the 7 inning doubleheaders, which was a tragic comedy, a farce. But now they have the DH in the National League and things like that that messes with the integrity of what the game has been throughout its history. That's a different argument. But in terms of just keeping up with, like you were talking about in your original question, the style and what kids today, to use a cliche, what kids today prefer, there's no doubt I'm all in favor of that. And the more guys can show their personality and we can get to embrace them for who they are on the field and off even, that's great. I'm all in favor of that.
Yeah, like the Field of Dreams game last season with Tim Anderson hitting that walk-off home run. That memory is iconic to me because Tim Anderson is he's loving it. He's showing his love for the game as he's going around the bases. And for me, I love trash talking. And Tim Anderson was definitely talking some trash as he's hitting home plate, as he should. And also for the old guard that says, oh, you can't hit a home run past this inning when it's this score. It's like, we're competing. And if you want your players to compete, why would you shame them for trying too hard? That's where the logic doesn't add up.
Yeah, it's dumb. Well, first, let me just go back to the Field of Dreams game. That was a horrible, horrible game because my Yankees were playing, and of course they lost.
Okay.
But I agree with you.
As a Phillies fan, it was great to see New York fans sad.
I hear you. If it had been against Boston, it would be one of my truly iconic moments as well. Yeah, but you're right, and it was great to see Anderson live in the moment and really embrace it and talk a lot. And one thing when everybody talks about the thing about hitting home runs when you're up 13-0 or whatever, are you supposed to just ground out? I mean, what are you supposed to do? Like, everybody forgets, and in a lot of these cases, these players then go to arbitration at the end of the year to decide their salaries, or they're becoming free agents. They have to get their contracts reworked, and that's of course all based on statistics. And you don't get to go back and say, well, in these couple at bats, we were already ahead by 5 runs, so I wasn't really trying. These guys are all trying to get paid. I mean, that's what they're up there to do. The pitcher's getting paid too. It's idiotic. It's just, to me, it's not even real. It's just like sports radio trying to find a way to drum up a little controversy during slow summer days. Really, it's not even worth engaging, to be honest.
No, I totally in agreement. But speaking of your Yankees, do you think this is the year? Do they finally get back and finally capture a World Series for the first time since Derek Jeter was still a shortstop?
Boy. Well, I just went to St. Louis, met some friends, and we saw them play at Busch Stadium. Didn't go so well. So based on recent events, I'm much less sanguine about it than I was a couple months ago. That's for sure. Injuries happen, and it's sort of, especially lately, the case in baseball and in sports, where the team that is looking like the favorite and might be the best team for the first few months of the season definitely is not when it's winning time. I'm here in Atlanta, as I said, and you can look no further than the Braves. I went to when the Yankees came to Atlanta last August and kicked the Braves all over the field. There's no way you would have looked at those two teams and thought to yourself, wow, 2 months from now, the Braves are the one who are going to be the world champs and the Yankees will be long gone. And yet, that's sports, and that's why we love them. I didn't love that particular result from the Yankee perspective. And, I'm hopeful. I don't think that they're of championship material necessarily because of a few flaws in the team. But in a way, as I just alluded to, going through a rough patch where they've played sort of, 50, 500 ball for the last month plus now, might be a good thing for the team. Get them refocused. They don't just mail it in until the playoffs start, and then all of a sudden they got to ratchet up their intensity and find a way to match what they used to take for granted. So it's not, I am, let's just say I'm guardedly optimistic, but when you become a sports fan of a certain age, as I am, you never really are optimistic about your team doing well, much less winning the World Series. And the worst thing you can do is talk about it or predict that it's going to happen. So I'll say that while the Yankees will be, in the mix, obviously, I remain, as always, a very conservative fan on that front.
That's fair. And every time I see Jimmy Rollins say that they're going to win in 5 games against the Yankees in 2009, I'm going to lose it on the Jay Leno show. Right. Never forget that. Last little thing here. I do a rapid fire segment called Off the Dome. It's like 35 seconds to answer 5 quick questions. Sound good?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
All right. And the timer is starting. Is Derek Jeter overrated? Yes or no?
No.
Barry Bonds a Hall of Famer?
Yes, no doubt.
Crocs, yes or no?
Crocs. The shoe or the reptile?
The shoe.
I would say the shoe. My kids wear them religiously, so I got to say yes. I don't wear them particularly myself, but they definitely.
Go-to drink at a restaurant?
Well, I don't really drink alcohol, so I'll stick with the unsweet tea. I'm an old guy here. You kids do the wild stuff.
Fair. Smooth or crunchy peanut butter?
Oh, crunchy all the way. Kidding?
Oh, no.
Peanuts, baby. Peanuts.
No, why? No, I don't want to bite into a sandwich and just feel a crunch when I want peanut butter. It's peanut butter. Butter is smooth by itself. What do I want crunch in there for? I don't need it.
Boy, yeah, the ghost of George Washington Carver, the inventor of 82 ways to use the peanut or whatever, he's rolling over right now because that's you got to have as many peanuts as possible in your sandwich. That's where the protein pack comes from in your PB&J.
But it's not butter. It's peanut. If you want to say peanut shell spread, sure, but it's not peanut butter.
We'll agree to disagree.
Fine, fair. All right. Well, on that sour note, but in all good. Thank you, Rob, so much. Really appreciate it. Any social media, any projects that you want to plug for the listeners back home?
Yeah, I would just say I'm always on Twitter, and please come by. It's at Rob Wine. That's ROBWEIN. And if you go to Amazon, search my name, Robert Weintraub, and you'll see all my books and various things there. I shouldn't just say Amazon because they're the conglomerate, but you can find them wherever books are sold. So I've got 4 of them. Every time somebody new discovers them, it's a great treat for me. So please do check them out. I know that we got one rave review today from you, so you can't go wrong there, right? If Matt says one of them's good, you got to know that all of them are, right? So thanks very much for letting
exactly. You can't go wrong. It's like smooth peanut butter. You can't go wrong with it. But that's just
it's like a prop. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Rob, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Everyone go check out Rob's books, and can't thank you enough.
No problem. I enjoyed it. Thanks to you, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Of course. And everyone, please like, comment, subscribe. We need to game the algorithm a little bit. So that would be nice with those subscriptions. Rob, if you could rate us 5 stars on podcasts and audio and subscribe on YouTube, that would be great. Wink, wink.
I will do what I can for you, of course.
Appreciate it, Rob. And everyone, thank you all for tuning in. And as always, have a great rest of your day.